You are standing in an Appalachian stream you have waded since childhood, and there is something under the flat rock beneath your left boot. The rock is the size of a car door, and it has been in that spot longer than you have been alive. So has the animal underneath it, an animal as long as your arm. You have never once seen it, because not moving is the entire strategy. But nothing that big hides that well by accident, and the trick that keeps it alive there is the same reason it is vanishing from 15 states. Turn that rock over and you would be looking at a hellbender. It is a salamander, and it is the largest one in North America. The longest ever recorded was a female measuring 29 inches, and a normal full-grown adult runs somewhere between 11 and 24 inches, heavy enough to hit 4 pounds. Picture a brown, mottled, slightly flattened animal with a wide shovel of a head, small eyes set far apart, and loose folds of skin hanging down both sides of its body like a curtain. 4 stubby legs, a thick paddle of a tail. Its closest living relatives are the Chinese and Japanese giant salamanders, which are the only other animals on Earth built anything like this. And it never leaves the water. Not to breed, not to sun itself, not for anything. It hatches in that river and it dies in that river. And in between, it spends almost every daylight hour pressed flat against the underside of one rock, in the same clear Appalachian shallows that people wade through barefoot every summer, and that kids in Tennessee and Pennsylvania and West Virginia jump into off a rope swing. So why has nobody you know ever seen one? Because stillness is the whole defense. That flattened body is built to sit low in fast water where a rounder animal would tumble downstream. The hellbender comes out at night to hunt crayfish along the stream bed, and it is back under the same rock before the light comes up. In spring, the male excavates a chamber underneath a big flat stone and guards the entrance, and a female enters and lays a long strand of eggs that looks like a string of pearls, sometimes 200 of them, sometimes over 1,000. He fertilizes the clutch, drives her back out, and then sits on that nest by himself, biting the head of any rival male that comes near, until the eggs hatch weeks later and the young are on their own. That is the whole life. The Virginia Department of Wildlife Resources puts the wild lifespan at up to 30 to 35 years. So the hellbender under that rock may have moved in before you were born, and never once given you a reason to look down. So how does it breathe down there, wedged under a rock in the dark, without ever surfacing? That question is where this stops being a story about a big salamander. A hellbender hatches with feathery external gills, and it loses them at around 18 months old, when it reaches 4 or 5 inches long. Adults do have lungs, they almost never use them to breathe. The scientific name of the family is Cryptobranchidae, which means hidden gill, and the description the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service publishes for this species is blunt about the reason. Hellbenders breathe entirely through their skin, which contains numerous folds to increase oxygen absorption. Those wrinkled curtains along its sides are not decoration, and they are not damage. Purdue Extension has an entire write-up on it called Aquatic Respiration, an unusual strategy in the hellbender. The folds exist to multiply surface area, the way the fins on a radiator do. Each one is packed with capillaries sitting a fraction of a millimeter from the open river. The gills are not hidden anywhere. The animal is the gill. It is a 2-foot lung with legs, lying under a rock in a creek in the eastern United States. Now follow what that cost it, because this is the hinge the entire story turns on. Skin breathing only works if the water shows up already carrying oxygen. Cold water holds far more dissolved oxygen than warm water does. Fast, broken, tumbling water over cobble holds more than slow water. So a hellbender cannot simply live in an Appalachian river. It has to live in the cold, fast, well-oxygenated part of an Appalachian river, wedged into moving current all day, every day, for 30 years. When the oxygen drops, it rocks its body back and forth under the rock to push fresh water across those folds, which is the amphibian version of gasping. A guarding male does the same thing on purpose over his eggs. undulating those loose flaps of skin to fan clean water across the clutch. Warm the stream a few degrees, or slow it down behind a dam where the water on the bottom goes stagnant, and a hellbender can suffocate while it is completely submerged. That is the mechanism. Hold on to it, because everything that has happened to this animal since runs straight through it. And what did people name it? Hellbender, snot otter, devil dog, mud devil, Allegheny alligator, lasagna sides, water dog, mud cat, walking catfish. The Virginia Department of Wildlife Resources tells the origin plainly on its own species page. Early settlers looked at this thing and decided it resembled a creature from hell that was hell-bent on getting back there. So, look at the actual record on the animal America named after the devil. It has no venom, no fangs, and no interest in you whatsoever. Nobody has ever been killed by one. And that same Virginia page states outright that hellbenders are non-poisonous and pose no threat to humans. They eat crayfish. Anglers still hook them by accident on live bait, and some of them still cut the line, or kill the animal right there on the bank because they are convinced it is venomous, or because they have heard it eats all the trout. The Virginia agency addresses that one too. Anglers grossly exaggerate it, and the impact on trout populations is negligible. In that state, it is illegal to kill a hellbender and illegal to keep one. If this is the kind of thing you want more of, real biology, real places, no invented monsters, subscribe. That is the whole reason this channel exists. Now, where does this animal actually live? Because the answer covers more of the map than most people expect. The eastern hellbender is not a West Virginia curiosity. Federal records put it across 15 states. Northeastern Mississippi, northern Alabama, northern Georgia, Tennessee, western North Carolina, western Virginia, West Virginia, Kentucky, eastern Illinois, southern Indiana, Ohio, Pennsylvania, western Maryland, southern New York, plus a separate population over in east-central Missouri. That is the Ohio River Basin, the Tennessee River System, the Susquehanna, the Allegheny, the French Broad down in the Blue Ridge. Virginia biologists have recorded them in streams as narrow as 5 meters across and in rivers over 200 meters wide, which is to say a channel you could jump and a channel you would need a boat for. So, if you live anywhere the Appalachians reach, from the Finger Lakes of New York down to the Georgia line, there is a real chance a hellbender is sitting under a rock in a creek you have driven over 1,000 times without once looking at the water. And this is not a rumor or a sighting somebody's cousin swears to. These animals get caught, measured, weighed, and implanted with a tracking tag, then logged in a state wildlife database in streams with names you already know. Now put the two facts together, because this is where the animal stops being a curiosity and becomes an instrument. Skin that soaks oxygen straight out of a river soaks up whatever else is in that river too. Lawn chemicals, runoff off a parking lot, untreated sewage, silt. A hellbender has no barrier against any of it, and the Virginia agency says so directly that anything toxic in the water goes straight into the body. It also cannot walk away. It does not leave the water, and it does not move far from its rock for its entire adult life. So what you have is a permanently installed sensor bolted into one specific stretch of one specific creek, wired directly into the water column, reading it continuously for 35 years. Find a healthy population of hellbenders in a river, with animals of every size, and you have learned something real about that river that no water sample taken on one afternoon can tell you. A grab sample measures 1 Tuesday. A hellbender measures 3 decades. Turn 100 good rocks in a stream that used to hold them and find nothing at all. And you have also learned something, and it is about the same water your kids swim in downstream. The specific thing killing them is not what most people would guess. It is dirt. When a hillside gets logged, or a stream bank loses the trees holding it together, or a new development sheds mud into a creek every time it rains hard, that sediment washes downstream and settles into the gaps under the big flat rocks. Those gaps are the entire life of this animal. That is the nest chamber, the daytime shelter, the ambush point, and the nursery where the young hide in the gravel. Silt fills the space in, buries the eggs and suffocates them, kills off the crayfish the adults eat, and packs the small stones the juveniles depend on into one solid mass. The rock is still sitting there. The creek still looks perfect from the bridge, still runs clear enough to photograph. The habitat underneath has been filled in. That is why you will see signs at trailheads across Appalachia asking people not to move rocks or stack cairns in the stream, and why Virginia biologists ask anglers who hook one by accident to cut the line rather than try to unhook it. It also explains why dams do so much damage to this animal. A dam does not just block a river. It turns fast broken water into a still pool, and still water on the bottom goes low in oxygen, which for a hellbender is the same as pulling the air out of the room. And that sets up the cruelest detail in this whole story. Because hellbenders live so long, a population can look completely fine while it is already finished. The Virginia agency calls it a common characteristic of hellbender declines across the entire range. A hard demographic shift toward large old individuals, with almost no young ones behind them. The grown animals are still there, still holding their rocks, still turning up in surveys, and still getting counted. Nothing is coming up behind them. Whatever went wrong with the nests went wrong years ago, and a 35-year lifespan hides the failure for a generation. A survey team can pull 12 healthy hellbenders out of a creek in Southwest Virginia and be looking at a population that will simply be gone in 20 years. That is exactly why Virginia funded the deployment of roughly 500 artificial nest boxes across 12 sites on 5 different streams. Concrete chambers sunk into the stream bed with a lid on top so that somebody could finally watch what actually happens to the eggs. Nobody knows yet. That is not a dodge. That is the honest state of the science. The reproductive biology of the largest amphibian on this continent is still understood so poorly that a state agency had to sink concrete boxes into a riverbed and go look for itself. Virginia also worked with the Smithsonian and volunteer naturalists to sample environmental DNA, water pulled out of a creek and tested for traces of the animal, because in Georgia and Tennessee, that method turned up populations nobody knew existed. Pennsylvania is the one state that decided this animal was worth making official. Starting in 2016, a group of high school students on the Chesapeake Bay Foundation's Pennsylvania Student Leadership Council spent 3 years on it. They studied the animal. They installed nest boxes in Pennsylvania streams themselves, and they wrote the first draft of the bill. In April 2019, the State House passed it 191-6, and the eastern hellbender became the official state amphibian of Pennsylvania. A snot otter, put on the books by teenagers, over 190 votes to 6. They did it because the animal is a gauge. A state that wants to know whether its water is genuinely clean can go turn over rocks and get an honest answer that no lobbyist can argue with. If you want to know what is in your own water, put the state and the body of water in the comments, and I will go find what has actually been documented in it. Because across the rest of the range, the reading this gauge has been giving is not good. Here's the count. The Fish and Wildlife Service documented 626 eastern hellbender populations historically, across the entire range, going back through every record it could find. As of the agency's 2024 assessment, 371 of them still exist. 41% of everything ever recorded is believed to be gone already. And of the 371 that survive, the agency classifies 218 as declining. Another 108 have unknown recruitment status, which in plain terms means nobody can say whether a single young animal is being produced in them. That leaves 45 populations, 12% of what is left, considered stable and successfully reproducing. 45. Across 15 states, an entire mountain range, and 200 years of American rivers. And remember what a declining population looks like for this particular animal. The adults are not dying off in front of anyone. They are still down there under their rocks, exactly where the survey crew expects to find them, while the gravel beds behind them sit empty. So the number that matters is not how many hellbenders a biologist can pull out of a creek in western Pennsylvania this August. It is how many of them are small. The western subspecies got to the bottom first. The Ozark hellbender lives in the rivers of southern Missouri and northern Arkansas, and it was listed as federally endangered in October 2011, by which point the wild population had fallen to somewhere around 600 animals total. The Missouri Department of Conservation has tracked declines of more than 70% over the past 40 years. A population assessment put the risk of extinction above 96% over the next 75 years without intervention. That is not a warning about some distant century. 75 years is the lifespan of a person born this year. And 600 animals is a number worth sitting with, because that is not 600 per river. That was the estimate for the entire subspecies, everywhere it exists on Earth, spread thin across a handful of clear Ozark streams in Missouri and Arkansas. You could have fit every wild Ozark hellbender left into a high school gymnasium and had room to walk around. The Ozark and the eastern hellbender are the same animal in almost every way that matters, living the same life under the same kind of rock. One of them just got to the cliff edge about 15 years earlier. So, Missouri intervened. In the autumn of 2011, after years of trying to reproduce a cold Ozark stream inside a building, the St. Louis Zoo hatched the first Ozark hellbenders ever bred in captivity anywhere in the world, more than 150 larvae in a single season. Since 2008, that program has released 9,476 zoo-raised hellbenders back into Missouri rivers, 8,599 of them Ozark and 877 eastern. To get there, the zoo staff had to build the Ozarks indoors, artificial streams with the water temperature and the daylight controlled closely enough that a salamander, which has never been out of a tank, would still decide it was autumn and time to breed. It is a real conservation achievement, and it is also a statement about how far things have gone. When the recovery plan for a wild American animal involves raising 9,000 of them by hand in tanks and carrying them out to the river in 5-gallon buckets, the river has already stopped producing them on its own. And a released juvenile still has to find a good flat rock in a clean stretch of cold water, which is the exact thing that ran out in the first place. Captive breeding buys time. It does not fix a creek. Then came September 2024. Hurricane Helene dropped up to 31 inches of rain across the southern Appalachians and set record flood levels through western North Carolina and eastern Tennessee. For an animal whose entire existence depends on one flat rock in one stretch of one creek, that storm was close to the worst possible event. The flood scoured some hellbender streams down to bare bedrock and stripped the cobble out of them completely. Other reaches got buried under new sediment, which is the exact thing that was already killing them, delivered in one afternoon instead of over 30 years. Surveys after the storm, written up by the Fish and Wildlife Service in a piece called Hellbent on Survival, found displaced hellbenders more than 50 feet from the river channel. In North Carolina, researchers were fielding reports of hellbenders turning up in people's backyards and in flooded basements, miles from the water those animals had spent their entire lives in. Think about what that means for a creature that breathes through its skin and cannot travel anywhere without water. It cannot walk home. And this is what connects back to the count. A healthy species absorbs a storm like that because animals from the next stretch of river move in over the following few years and refill the gap. A species already broken into 371 separate populations, most of them declining, most of them cut off from each other by dams and warm, dead water, has nobody left to send. So the streams Helene emptied may just stay that way. Which brings us to the paperwork. and the reason this story still does not have an ending. On December 13th, 2024, the Fish and Wildlife Service formally proposed listing the eastern hellbender as endangered throughout its entire range, citing sedimentation, water quality, habitat destruction, disease, and direct killing. The public comment period closed on February 11th, 2025. Under the Endangered Species Act, the agency then had until December 2025 to publish a final rule and make that protection real. December 2025 came and went with no final rule. On February 17, 2026, the Center for Biological Diversity filed suit in federal court to force a binding deadline, roughly 16 years after the original petition to protect this animal was filed. So here is where it stands tonight. There is a 2-foot amphibian under a rock in a creek in your state that breathes through the wrinkles in its own skin, that has never hurt anybody, and that has been reading out the condition of American water continuously for longer than most of us have been alive. 60% of its populations are still there. 12% are actually reproducing. The gauge has been showing the same number for 50 years, and the only thing left for anyone to do was write it down. If you want to see what happens in a river where nobody was reading the gauge at all, the video on screen is that story.